Hi, my name is Michael Besner. I'm the E-Community Place Director at the Inauken Center. I'm a conservation ecologist, biologist. I've worked at the center for 6 years now. And my role and responsibility is to help the center advance its programming with recovering, revitalizing, and perpetuating Okanagan culture, language, community, and environment. We're partnered with the Regional District Okanagan-Similkameen and the Okanagan Nation Alliance on the Community to Community Growing Stronger Together project. So that project is an important project where we're engaging local schools and other community members to help us recover the endangered cottonwood ecosystem. Some of these trees that you see here around us, the black cottonwood, or mulch in the Insilchin language, are a foundational part of these streamside and wetland ecosystems here in the South Okanagan-Similkameen. Some of the areas that we are protecting through the Inauken Center, through leases and purchases on reserve of locatee lands, are helping to support some of the last remaining black cottonwood forests here in the Okanagan. There are a number of species at risk and culturally significant species that are tied to this particular tree. Some of the important food species, like in Titi'ich, the Chinook salmon, we understand in its early growth stage, from the fry to smolt stage, relies on insects that fall off of the leaves of cottonwoods and other riparian plants. That's an important food species to sustain not only Okanagan people, but other people here in the Okanagan. The salmon, of course, are interconnected with bears and eagles that eat the salmon and sometimes drag those carcasses back into the forest, which again become fertilizer for these very same trees. It's all part of an interconnected ecology or ecosystem that we're fundamentally a part of. If we were to lose all of the black cottonwood forests here in the valley, we would stand to lose possibly hundreds of different species that are all interconnected to this one plant. It's a wonderful project that we're engaged in with the Regional District and the Okanagan Nation Alliance, really helping young people in particular connect with that plant and take an active role and responsibility in recovering this ecosystem and all of the species and human beings that are connected to it. Two of the species that we're most concerned about that are directly connected to the black cottonwood tree are the western screech owl, or Quolquol snina. It's a small owl about, if I were to put my two fists together, that's about as tall as they are. They look very similar to the great horned owl, which is not at risk, which is a much bigger owl. But the western screech owl, or Quolquol snina, likes to nest in cavities or holes excavated in mulch, or black cottonwood trees. They don't excavate the holes themselves. They rely on other species like the northern flicker or other woodpeckers to create those holes as primary cavity nesters. But once the flickers have nested in it and have abandoned the nest to go make a new nest the next year, then that cavity becomes a prime home for other species, including the western screech owl. Unfortunately, we've done a very good job in the last 150 years since European colonization of essentially decimating all of the old growth cottonwood trees. And so most of the cottonwoods that we have now in the Okanagan, including most of the cottonwoods you see around us, they're only about 50 to 75 years old. As far as we know, those trees can grow to be 150 up to a couple hundred years old. And it's those very large trees that have heart rot, a fungus inside that makes them soft and makes them perfect for northern flickers to excavate those holes, those cavities. So as a stopgap measure right now, we're hoping to protect these cottonwoods so that they can get much bigger, much older. But until that happens, in the meantime, we build and install these nest boxes specifically designed for western screech owls and other species like the wood duck. And so there's an example of one of these wood boxes just in the cottonwood behind us. This nest box and several others that we have mounted in the cottonwood forests around us are that temporary home until these cottonwoods can get old enough and big enough for screech owls and flickers and other creatures to use them. The other species of concern that we're worried about is the Lewis's woodpecker. So Lewis's woodpeckers are also considered threatened in Canada, like the western screech owl. Lewis's woodpeckers are interesting in that they will nest in 3 different habitat communities, one of which is the black cottonwood riparian community. They like to nest in recently burned areas, usually higher in slope. They also like to nest in ponderosa pine and sometimes Douglas fir trees in our dry woodlands, in our benchlands. But then the third community that they really like is the black cottonwood community. And we haven't seen many Lewis's woodpeckers in the lands that we're taking care of here on the Penticton Indian Band Reserve. But it is one of those species we're hoping to bring back as part of this greater project to bring black cottonwoods back into the community.
Some of the fundamental principles that we all share around sustainability and what we want for our children in the future is something that is a common belief and a cornerstone for the activities that we do in our daily lives, not only at work but at home. So I just want to say thank you for all the work that you guys do to make this a better place to live, and that I hope we can roll up our sleeves and really get to work on creating a future that has water and our relatives here a future.
The cottonwood has always been very special for me. I grew up on the West Bench, still live there, and used to roam around down in the cottonwoods along the river looking for long-eared owl nests and things like that. So it's always been a special habitat for me, but it's a very special, it's a symbolic habitat along the riverside. We often talk about communities on either side of the river here in Penticton, and the cottonwood that provides so much habitat and home for wildlife. Its roots bind the banks of the river. I hope that we can bind our communities together with a project like this. I know I've been working with Chad and others in the Nelkin Center on planting cottonwoods and sea and other plants and bushes in that e-community place, and been very, very happy to see the effects that has in bringing our children together, because it's our kids that have to learn from us to get along, bring our communities together, and I'm really happy that this project is happening, and happy that I could play a very small role in it. So thank you.
When we were first entertaining this project, and we were at the Nelkin Center, and the Artie West was in the middle of dealing with floods. And as we walked out, we were talking about the value of the cottonwood, and he said cottonwoods, they only spread their seed or the cotton flies at high water. Well, that cottonwood hadn't flown then. We were already really tired of floods. So I asked him how long. He said about 14 days. Right on the money. The lake peaked, everything, and I walked home that day when Fleur said, that's it, we're at the top. I walked home through the cottonwood flying, so absolutely traditional knowledge. And he is a very talented musician, but he's also a traditional knowledge keeper with the Nelkin Center and the PIB and the other nations. So he is also going to be working very closely on this project. So Skayu, please.
Why Iswis Ayu, Kentos Malkamik. My grandparents are Leonard and Connie Lewis from the Lower Smokemeen Indian Band on my father's side, and my mother's side, John and Kathy Degenhardt, who were German farmers who ended up in Kermies for their lifetime. It's important we introduce ourselves through our family before we speak. This is our relative here. This is Mulch. I would like everyone to say that word actually, Mulch. I don't want anyone to be scared of engaging with our knowledge because it's so important to us. We've been working with this Mulch and this project for a couple months, and I've been learning at the Inauken Center that our areas used to be, the Mulch used to thrive in the wetlands. It was a very important plant for shelter, for food. It's our medicine, it's our transportation. And we know this from our old place names, we know this from our tech, our knowledge keepers. Some of them are in this room. And that's the type of knowledge that we work from at the Inauken Center to perpetuate the existence of these trees. And what I see out there now is we're not acting very responsibly to our environment. Maybe the last 150 years or so, there's been a lot of destruction to this relative, and it's caused a lot of harm, not only for our people, but for the environment, for the tamik, for all the living things out there that we depend on. And there's ways that we can live that are in regeneration of the land. And it's my hope, I'm very hopeful that we're all gathered in this room, not quite in a circle like I'd like, but we're gathered here for this cottonwood, for our Mulch, for our relatives. And it's going to take a lot of work because you can't just plant these trees and expect them to flourish and turn into forests. We have to nurture them, we have to create spaces for them to be protected, and we have to create spaces for us to learn about them. You know, a lot of my Canadian friends, they don't know much about this because they don't have the experience to go into a Mulch forest, because we don't have very many left in the Okanagan. We have one really beautiful stand at our Lokati lands at the Inauken Center that we've been working for decades to protect. And if you go there, the only way you can understand this relative of ours is if you go there and you listen to all the sounds that you can hear in that forest. And you can observe all of the life all the way from the tops of the mountains to the valley bottoms. They depend on these ecosystems. And our people depend on these to make canoes. And that brings us together. And our salmon are coming back up the river, and they really, really need this to be near the river so they can have shade, so that they can lay eggs in the roots, so that they have insects that fall off there and they have food. And so it's really important that we're gathered here today. But it's not just important that we're doing this process, it's important that we nurture what we're trying to create. It's important that, I observed, right now there's tons of little Mulch sprouts happening all over the place. I don't know if you've noticed, but they really rely on floods. And a lot of the conversation I heard about floods lately is how destructive and how problematic it is. But for this relative right here, they really rely on those floods. So it's important that we rethink our whole way of living if we want this project to be successful. For Mulch, for our relatives, and for all the living things out there. Yeah, keep it short, that's all I'll say. Why?
Why is quist sumahatuk Gentils and Pinkton? So when you say that, when you hear the word Mulch, and I noticed a lot of you didn't actually say it, so this is a community-to-community forum. We need to think about those things when we bring these processes to our politicians. It's a lot for our knowledge keepers to bring this knowledge that is 14,000 years or older. And so when we have this community-to-community engagement forum, we really need to think about, are we engaging or are we just doing the same thing that we've always done? So that's just an observation that I noted and that I'm comfortable speaking about. So Mulch, the end of the word is and when you look at the word timhula, that word is part of the break. Our language, the Nsiltjan language, is the oldest artifact that you can record that is real. It is what tells each and every single one of you that we're from here, that we belong here. And so when we speak those words and when we speak that language, we're speaking from a place of that knowledge of the land speaking to us and what that means. So mulch, that at the end, that means movement, the cyclical movement of moving in a cyclical circular form, timhulach. And so those circles that are formed, like the cranes that circle over us when we sing our crane song, or the circles that are formed in here when we're making decisions or we're building consensus and we're building that knowledge of the protocol, the protocols that are being thought about in consensus forming, and that we want to be able to community relate to one another. That's all I wanted to really talk to you about. I'm a knowledge keeper. So I train with Jeanette Armstrong. She is my mentor, and another group of other spiritual, knowledgeable women in the Okanagan, up and down through the valley. My late father is from Ikmapulks, which is in the Vernon area. But I'm also a professional, and I'm also, I also do that work. So those are the only comments that I wanted to make. My name, Sumachat, has that in the name, and what it means is that I get my power from the water. I was given that name from my great uncle from the Columbia River, and because our people don't just we're not tied by that 49th parallel. Our wherever our language is spoken, those are our people and those are our relatives, and so that doesn't mean I'm powerful. It means that I have a responsibility to water, and that I have to carry that responsibility in all the work that I do. And so this mulch is a water keeper. It ensures that each and every one of you have healthy water. And we have our communities in Attawabaskat, we have our communities across Canada, Indigenous communities, that prayed for water, that are really praying for clean drinking water for all of our people. And so all of those prayers that were said last winter, praying for the water, we ended up with floods. So we prayed for that. We wanted clean water, and we got a lot of water. I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm really happy to work with Michael and Skyu and Tessa from ONA. I know that there's good work, and Ava, Mr. Cannings, it's always an honor to work with you when I see you abroad. So, this will be part of an engagement process that will be ongoing. I'm going to introduce Robert Edward, who's going to have some remarks, and then we'll hear from Tessa from ONA. Limlimt.
When I look at this, I always think about, when we plant these trees in our communities, they could be meaningless if we continue on what's been going on. When you look at the fires that are happening in our territory and other parts of the world, I guess, and other territories, it's because we're legislated out of our interaction with our land, with our Timuhulau. We talk about Tamih, we're not talking about just one. We're talking about all of them, how they interact and how we interact. Our knowledge didn't come, 151 years ago. Our knowledge came long before that. We deal with biologists, we deal with foresters, we deal with all these people that think they have knowledge. And yet, I always tell people I graduated from the University of Chapaka in 1983 when my dad said, "Now you are the man of this house." And he passed away. And he instilled with me all the knowledge that I need to carry on this kind of work, to help my people put their foot on the ground again, to make our land healthy. Because everything we're going through now wasn't just something that was predicted, was talked about in my dad's time. I was really fortunate to grow up with an elder, because when I was born, my dad was an elder. I was really fortunate for that. And all the teachings from here back to then, and all the teachings from here front that I'm teaching my children and some of the community members I work with is for that. Our land is sick, as already talked about. Our land is getting sick. We see those fires is because they say Smokey the Bear done a good job. But the reality is, for us, it hasn't done a good job. Our medicines, our foods, everything we have out there in the forests aren't there anymore because of our lack of legislated interaction. You know, we need this community to really work. And if you want to do something in our land, you come and ask us. And I guarantee you we're not going to say no. Because when we look at water, and if it's polluted, it's not good for you or me. And if our land is sick, it's not good for you or me. So when we think about this, it's got to be positive. We got to walk forward together, not you guys walk behind us. You guys listen to us. You guys, we have a plan for you. Here's what we think is better for you. All those have been done in the past 150 years, and it hasn't worked. So we need to stand up and really think about this protocol or this interrelationship that we're going to have. We're talking about one Tamil here, one of the ecosystem, and how that works. I said the next thing I think about is a stunach, the beaver. You know, he relies on this. He's the gardener of this tree here. So when I think about those things, it's going to be meaningful. Because for me, it doesn't matter. I continue the fight anyway. And when I'm gone, my sons and my daughter and my grandchildren continue the fight anyway. Because I always talk throughout my years is that you can't fight the truth. You can't legislate me off of something and say, this is right. You got to sit there and look at yourself in good conscience and say, you know, we tried. We really walked down this path together. And if it's our last day here, then we can look at each other in the eye and say, we tried. And that's the biggest thing I always think about is when I talk about Tamil, when I talk about Tamhula, when I talk about Siul. And the EA processes that go on in Canada and British Columbia, they make up their mind what they call it what's that word, Tessa? VC? Valued component. And when I look at it, they say water is one of them. And I ask you people in here, but if you're religious people, and I say, you give me one of your 10 commandments, I'll put it in a bag or a box and you forfeit that. When I forfeit, the valued component is water. That's one of the first things the Creator created was water. The next was Tamhula, then the Tamil, then the Spelu. So when I look at this thing, I said, you know, we can't just lay idle words to this. If we're going to talk about a relationship, then we need to look at the relationship. Because for the past 150 years, my people have been in abusive relationship. And then, well, I guess maybe we mistake that for love because we're still here. And we're always going to be here. Why limit?
Why and chai squeeze kukumshkin kintel samilkami. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tessa Terbasket. I work for the Okanagan Nation Alliance in Natural Resource Management, and I'm from the Lower Similkameen community. I first want to take the time to really thank Zoe and Eva for approaching the nation and our communities to participate and engage in this small but important project. And I just want to say that who I am is directly tied to the Similkameen River, where I'm from, and its health, its habitat, its riparian, its cottonwood zones and trees. And if it's not healthy, then I'm not healthy. And it's a really important lesson that I learned young, and something that we need to really be passing on to our next generations and our children. And I want us to recognize that the past 150 years hasn't been good for the wetlands and the rivers. Our ecosystems and waters, Penticton sits on prime wetland habitat that we've lost. And it's it's important, as Zoe was saying, that this project, that we're focusing on the next 150 and how we can do things better and rebuild those trusts. And for our people, we're directly connected to the health of the land. And I want to thank Zoe for recognizing that this is unceded Okanagan territory. We never gave up any rights or title to this land, and who we are as people is directly connected to how we are able to look after the land. And so when we talk about reconciliation and building these relationships, it's directly tied to the land and looking forward and rebuilding these ecosystems that we as humans have destructed.
One thing municipalities have been trying to bring forward in the last couple of years are riparian regulations. So riparian means adjacent to streams or wetlands or lakes for that matter. And so because we've done such a good job of destroying riparian habitats, increasingly governments, federal government, provincial government, municipal governments like the regional district have recognized that there's this imperative, this need for us as a culture, as a civilization, to get back to protecting these important ecosystems because they do help regulate water quantity and they help protect water quality. And so these local bylaws, riparian regulations, I think a lot of people are really struggling with those because it really does mean that we have to change our way of thinking and doing things. We really do have to start this process of moving our human developments, whether they're commercial, residential, or even agricultural. We really do have to start this process of removing them out of the floodplain. We've done such a great job of controlling our waterways, channelizing our rivers, putting up dams and weirs. That's benefited us because we've been allowed to develop floodplains. But all of that infrastructure has limits. And at some point, nature is going to exceed the limits that we've built those standards to. And because that's what nature does. Moving forward, thinking ahead, it really behooves us to start working with nature instead of against nature. Instead of trying to control nature, might we start working with nature as a partner in our health, in the partner of the health of future generations, and start thinking about moving our human developments outside of the floodplains. My understanding is that Okanagan people, the Seal people, they learned this over a period of time, and they learned that developing permanent structures in floodplains is really not a good idea. It was okay to build temporary structures in the floodplains and to harvest the abundance of life and food in floodplains. But they knew that every once in a while that floodplain's going to get flooded, and so you can't build permanent settlements there. And even though you might try to control water for periods of time, eventually nature is going to up the ante and overwhelm the infrastructure that you've built. To me, there's a fundamental lesson modern civilization has to learn. We can't control nature. If we try to do that, we're going to suffer. So maybe it's better that we start working with nature and allow nature that floodplain space that it needs to keep everything healthy. And riparian regulations that municipalities are now enacting are really the beginning of that process of encouraging us, of giving us incentives to do that, to transition our developments outside of floodplains. Another aspect of black cottonwoods and this habitat type or plant community that we're really see as important is their role in regulating both water quantity and water quality. They regulate water quantity in the sense that during high flows, during floods, black cottonwoods are that one big tree plant that likes to have its feet wet. It grows right in the water, right next to the water. It's okay with being flooded for a period of time. And these huge, massive trees absorb vast quantities of water during these flood periods. They suck that water up from the floodplain and they store that water for long periods of time. And there's increasing evidence to show that the black cottonwoods, as they store that water, when that water is readily available during floods, they then have the capability of slowly releasing that water into the ecosystem, not only for their own benefit, but for the benefit of other plants that are growing around them. Much like cactuses would do in southern deserts. So it's imperative that we have our black cottonwoods because they're the things that are helping to regulate those high floods, those flooding events that we all get concerned about. If we were to decimate and remove all of the black cottonwoods, the impact of our floods would be much greater than we currently experience. And I think much of the pain and suffering that we're experiencing as human beings during these most recent flood events are because we've been a little greedy as human beings. We've really done a good job of annihilating these cottonwood forests, and really, I think, had we been more enlightened, we would have left these cottonwood floodplains alone and built our human developments outside of those floodplains. I think that's really the lesson that we should be learning. And communities that are learning those lessons, those are tough lessons. Learning to remove our human developments out of floodplains and letting floodplains do what they do naturally, I think is a fundamental lesson that we're going to have to learn as human beings moving forward. The other role that black cottonwoods play is regulating water quality. Black cottonwoods and many of the other species that you see growing along streams and wetlands, they filter out toxins that are in the environment. They also act as filters for the artificial toxins that we put in the environment. The fungicides, the pesticides, the herbicides that we spray on our lawns or golf courses or agricultural fields. When we leave a large buffer zone of habitat, natural habitat, adjacent to wetlands and rivers, all of those plants, all of those soils, all of those organisms, bacteria and fungus in that plant community really take those toxic compounds and convert them into something that's non-toxic. Or they prevent those toxic elements from entering our water. We are mostly water. Our health is directly connected to the health of the water in our environment. If we're not keeping our water clean, if we're not taking care of all of the habitats and species like black cottonwoods that are filtering out and cleaning the water before it gets into our rivers and wetlands and lakes, we're going to manifest those toxins in our own bodies. We're going to become unhealthy. So really protecting black cottonwoods, protecting this entire plant and animal community is a fundamental part of keeping us healthy.
RDOS is working together with project partners, Okanagan Nation Alliance and the Naukin Center. And what they're doing, they're working also with the Okanagan Indian Educational Resource Society, School District Number 67, Okanagan Skaha, and UBC to celebrate many thousands of years of regional landscapes of the Okanagan with particular focus on the black cottonwood forest communities. The project will commemorate the shared resources of land and water, paving the way forward to a more sustainable future for the South Okanagan. So I'd like to, on behalf of Summerland Secondary School, thank Eva for coming and for Heron Hall, who is the traditional ecological knowledge keeper for the Naukin Center. So welcome.
So I just wanted to mention how the black cottonwood ecosystem is amongst the rarest plant communities in the southern interior, and it also provides a crucial habitat for a wide range of unique plants and animals on land and water. And it's been kind of underestimated ecosystem.
For many of thousands of years, and even today, we have utilize the cottonwood tree for many uses, and we'll get to that. I guess, actually, before we continue, I just want to point out this slide right here. It's done by Casey Moran, and you'll learn about her in a later slide.
Casey Moran is a UBC PhD student candidate, and she's actually involved with us with our Cottonwood project, and she's going to be monitoring all of these cottonwoods you will hear further on for the next 4 or 5 years while she's doing her PhD. And in addition to that, she's an artist. And this is the view that she grew up with at Twin Lakes. Black cottonwood, and lots of you, it's one of those trees that people love to hate because of the various aspects of the tree, but it's a deciduous tree that thrives on wet sites, especially in the floodplains. And it's actually the most impressive North American largest hardwood tree. It can grow up to 50 meters, and in the olden days, the trees would even reach to 2 meters in diameter. And it is a keystone species that supports life of so many other animals and plants, like we said.
Could everyone say mool? That's the Syilx name for cottonwood, or black cottonwood specifically. In the spring and early summer, a sticky resin covers the buds. As you can see right there, that sticky resin, and it has a nice sweet smell, kind of like your tree out here. And often that fragrance could waft along the valley for a long distance. And it's antimicrobial, and it has some medicinal usage by the Syilx people, which I'm not totally going to get into here, but it is utilized by the Syilx people as a medicine and also for waterproofing.
Okay, and another thing that the cottonwoods have is you have 2 sexes, males and females. So this would be a male catkin and a female catkin. And people often say they are allergic to cottonwood fluff, which is nearly impossible because the allergies develop to protein coatings on pollen. So if they would be allergic to anything, it would be these male catkins earlier in the season, in March. The catkins are actually full of C vitamin, and they say you could use them in soups. They are very highly nutritional. And then in the June, again, we have these seeds that are enveloped in these fluffy threads that allow them to go in great distances. And it is highly absorbent, this fluff. And I think in traditional usages, it was used for bandages and pads, babies' diapers, things like that. Riparian tree. Ripa in Latin means the water's edges. It is very dependent on water. It's not, it can't sit in the water, the roots can't sit in the water all the time, but it's dependent on the fluctuation of flooding, and it supports all these other ecosystems of different plants and animals, and it provides shades, diffuse shade for water organisms like fish and amphibians. This is a diagram by Casey. She's a really good resource that we have here in our project. So here you see another characteristic that cottonwoods have is that they have these really deep roots that go into the groundwater, and they tap into this groundwater. And during the drought periods, they actually can displace water up into the upper parts for other plants to utilize. Additionally, once the tree, in addition to seed propagation, which has a higher genetic variation, they also have this capacity of cloning itself. So if the old tree dies, you get these new trees coming up. So these are all clones.
A key factor in the destruction of cottonwoods is the channelization of the river, as you can see there. It altered the natural waterways. And many streams in the valley have been channelized or diked, and we can see that in our environment now. And it prevents flooding from happening, which is really inhibits the growth of new cottonwood trees. So you could see from here the historical perspective of the natural meandering of the river to here the channelization of the river. And that's because of human development, colonization. You could see the environmental and like the ecological and the historical impacts in the past 150 years that Canada has existed here in the Okanagan. So the Okanagan specifically lost 85% of its wetlands and 63% of the Cottonwood ecosystem.
Okanagan Basin Water Board actually right now is developing maps. They are mapping the wetlands and what's left over, and they're also doing the mapping of the forefronts. I think Okanagan Lake has now lost 65% of the foreshores are gone. So it's very quickly encroaching on us, all this development. And they have statistics there if you go on the Okanagan Basin Water Board website. So by the end of the season, they have this glorious color, the cottonwoods, and the leafy debris is really important for as a food for caddisfly. You see here, and then these insects in turn are eaten by fish and our red-listed lizard. Is it the long?
In Okanagan, we call this one Injachina, and it's a tiger salamander. Or no, actually, I think that's a long-toed salamander. Sorry, I got confused. Yeah, that one's a long-toed salamander, and I actually don't know the word for that one yet, but I will learn. And then this is Intitich, which everyone knows as salmon.
And you can see on the slide next to it how the shade that it provides and shelter. And then as the wood rots, it becomes really easy for birds to use it for cavities. So you have primary cavity makers, which would be woodpeckers. Here is your Lewis's woodpecker, which is red listed. And then the secondary bird nesting cavity nesters are then owls. And this is a western screech owl, which is endangered as well.
So this is Herman Edwards, and he is a Syilx knowledge keeper and language speaker here in the Okanagan. And one of the things that also happened in colonization is that we lost our cultural ways of learning and doing things and navigating waterways. But Herman Edwards, in the past, since 2000, along with the late Gordy Marchand, relearned how to carve traditional cottonwood canoes. And since then, we've been navigating all the waterways as a way of reaffirming and reasserting our presence out on the land and in the water. So here are some beautiful canoes. I think this one actually, the Penticton Indian Band has it is utilized by the youth right now.
I recently met with Herman Edward, and he's a lovely person, and he was telling us how he would like to get hands on a 2-meter diameter cottonwood, because those are really, you cannot find them anymore, because in the old days you could have 2 adult men sitting side by side on a canoe rowing. That's how big they were. So what is this community-to-community project? You already did an introduction earlier. The RDOS was successful in receiving Heritage Canada's funding for the celebrating the future Canada, 150 years in Canada. And this project serves specifically to raise awareness of the importance of the ecosystem and engaging community and work with First Nations on our common goal, celebrating the shared resources of land and water and paving the way forward to a more sustainable future for the South Okanagan. And we've actually had lots of on-the-ground, hands-on projects this year. In the spring, we took cuttings in February and March, and we propagated those. And then in June, we collected seeds, and we grew those seeds, and then we planted 1,500 cottonwoods on 10 sites, 110 cottonwoods per site with the various groups. And we also conducted lots of tours at the community locatee lands, and we'll tell you more about that. And classroom presentations are still ongoing. Heron and I still have to present with our agreement with Heritage Canada. We still have to present 11 school presentations. So So here is the team, myself, then we have Okanagan Alliance team and Auken and Casey Moran and Zoe Kirk, she's here, and many volunteers. So here is our Auken Center grouping with Heron here and Michael Besner. And Sky Yu was here. He's actually gone to do a master's degree in Aboriginal Studies in Hawaii. Right now he's in Honolulu. But in February we took lots of cuttings. As you can see here, we took cuttings at Auken and then we stacked them in here. And this is what grew by the end of the year. There was lots of tending of those. And then we have Casey Moran here with her summer student Sabine planting seeds. And these seeds grew into these tiny little babies. As we talk to kids, we say how Cottonwood ecosystem is like a family. It has grandparents and parents and children and babies. And what happened now in our Cottonwood ecosystem, it's only grandmas are left and grandpas. They need to. So these are our babies that we're now planting with children.
When I think about the cottonwood tree, I could see a lot of parallels between the historical significance and the resilience the cottonwood tree has gone through. And it's kind of parallel with the Indigenous experience of destruction, colonization, deforestation, and the removal of the children, kind of similar in the sense to residential schools. So as I've been working on this project, I've been seeing a lot of parallels in how the cottonwood tree could kind of metaphorically speak to the experience of Indigenous people in the last 150 years.
These are then just further along. These are now toddlers. Anyway, and then we had, this is Naramata School. The children actually did transplants from seedlings into larger pots. Then we had them at the even larger pots. There's them planting in situ at the Lokati lands. And then we had this is a nature club. They were planting larger specimens. This was a very feisty, great worker planting cottonwoods. Fathers were really good at digging up huge holes when we needed them. And there's Tessa Terbasket. She's been one of our partners in this project. And then Casey, with her huge project she took soil samples of every single hole that we dug, and she's going to be studying them later, and this is how we place them, and she mapped them all by contours and all this data that she's collecting for her PhD work. This is us in one of the classes, Heron and I.
So the e-community place is kind of run by the Inauken Center. It's a department at the Inauken Center. And the low KT lands now are one of the largest stands of cottonwood in the Penticton region. And it's been protected for hundreds of years, and specifically in the last 20 years by the Inauken Center and the e-community place. This is a small fragment of what once was an extensive riparian forest that existed all along the channel. It has dense thickets of deciduous shrubs that provide ideal habitat for endangered yellow-breasted chats, right there. And I remembered the owl's name, Quilquilsnina. I feel like I'm an elder right now with this foggy, sick brain that has to, forgets things and remembers later on. So there's Quilquilsnina, Adderseek, Swarachin, that's in China. That's the tiger salamander that I was speaking to before. And then the yellow-breasted chat, that will have to come back to me again. And then, of course, we have our 4 food chiefs. And so the e-community place is a rare habitat for all of these species who are at risk. And so the low KT lands is really significant to this part of the valley and this part of the region because it's one of the last stands for their homes to exist and thrive and flourish. And we've been doing a lot of research specifically with the yellow-breasted chat throughout the years.
Can I add? Because the yellow-breasted chat, actually 20% of all of the breasted chats in British Columbia, I think, are at the Locati lands, and they're now being banded. And you banded them when you were a little girl. They are banded, and they actually have discovered them down in Mexico and Arizona, I think. And Michael Besner is hoping to establish some kind of a school relationships between us and those schools further down, and have children maybe students carry on relationships with these other students. Anyway, on the side here quickly. Yeah, this is one of the excursions that actually Heron and Michael both do tours at the Locati lands. And here is Michael showing off milkweed seed. And the tours are now the weather's not really suitable, but I'm sure in the spring they will start again. Yeah, I just wanted to say how these cottonwoods ecosystems provide habitat to all of these endangered species, and we all have to do our bit to recognize these and to help them out. And this is another one of our Casey Moran's drawings.
If you want to bring your schools to the Locati lands, you guys are more than welcome. Part of your visit helps us to protect the lands, because the Locati lands are specifically held by the Penticton Indian band members, and what the Inalkin Center does is it leases the land so that it can so that the Locati holders are not thinking about developing. And it also provides them with an income. And so we encourage visitors, and we also encourage donations, and we are looking forward to seeing you out there.
Some of the work we're doing with the Okanagan Nation Alliance and their fisheries department is supporting their work and their mandate to help bring salmon back to the Okanagan. Salmon were prevented from reaching the Okanagan River here in Penticton and into Okanagan Lake because of the dams that were put along the Columbia River system, and also the dams and weirs put on the Okanagan closer to our backyards. So they've been charged more recently with bringing salmon back into the system. One of the challenges we have, however, is that as salmon come back into the system to spawn, the water temperatures are too high. All salmonids, salmon and trout, require very cold, clean waters and clean gravel to lay their eggs in, and so that their eggs can successfully transform into small fish and fry. Unfortunately, because we've channelized the rivers and we've prevented trees from growing alongside the river channel and the dikes, it's exposed all of our waters to the sun. And here in the Okanagan, we have hot temperatures during the summertime, so that's meant elevated water temperatures through much of the year. And often those water temperatures are far in excess of the water temperatures that our native salmon and trout can endure. One of the functions black cottonwoods have, and all the other riparian trees and shrubs in this plant community, is that they provide that essential shading to our local lakes, wetlands, and streams. And those are the conditions that salmonids have adapted to for thousands, if not millions of years. And suddenly we're removing that shading element from all of our local waterways. If we're going to be successful in bringing salmon back as a food source for human beings and as a food source for all the other living creatures that are indigenous to this place, it's important that we restore these habitats. And black cottonwoods are an absolutely essential part of restoring that shade function and that entire ecological system. Another element of the black cottonwoods that's foundational for the health of our salmon and trout is the leaf litter that falls into the creeks and rivers during the fall. These leaves are broken down by invertebrates, aquatic invertebrates in the water that use those leaves as a food source. Those aquatic invertebrates in turn become food for the young salmon and the young trout. That allows them to build enough size to be able to migrate back to the ocean. Without black cottonwoods and without the leaves that are falling into the creeks, we wouldn't have aquatic invertebrates, and therefore we wouldn't have food for young trout and salmon. So it's absolutely vital that we bring black cottonwoods in this plant community back to our rivers, streams, and wetlands to provide that source of food and fuel for the aquatic invertebrates and our trout and salmon.